With the year 2021 now almost in our rear view, we were met with 9 new Marvel Cinematic Universe projects to talk about, so I thought it was the perfect time to sit down and rank all 32 MCU projects from my least favorite to my favorite. I've never done this on my channel before, so boy am I excited. And after you're done watching this video, make sure to comment down below and let me know your ranking of all 32. If you want to give me your top 10, your top 5, whatever you feel like putting down below, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Let's continue to add to the conversation. Coming in at last place is going to be Eternals, one of the projects I was looking forward to the most this year, but that sadly just really missed the mark for me, and it feels like the least MCU film out of all of them. And that's something that when you say it like that, it sounds kind of good. It's fresh, unique, different. But the thing is, as you dive into this movie, there's a lot of problems with trying to introduce too many characters at once, so many different plot points. There's a way that the film is pieced together to where certain big reveals are given to us midway through the film, so when it's revealed to all the other characters towards the end, it's lacking any of the impact that it would have had if they would have just waited before telling the audience. It's got villains that are forgettable. It's got some characters who just, their motivations are so scattered throughout the point of this film that there are things that happen in the finale to where they're just not even present in the movie because they decided to back out for moral reasons. Chloe Zhao crafted a film that looks good, but as you dive deeper into it, it's incredibly messy. At number 31 is Thor: The Dark World, a film that's universally disliked by Marvel fans, and that's just because it promises a perilous and personal journey, the biggest yet for Thor, but once you actually get into the movie, it's very mediocre and bland, and while it introduces some ideas that seem interesting, it never really goes anywhere with those concepts or expands on it in an interesting way. It also has a villain, Malekith, that is one of the most forgettable, if not the most forgettable, in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, along with pairing Jane Foster and her friends who are very just obnoxious, stubborn, annoying in every way, and Thor just doesn't have a ton of personality here. This is an issue that the first 2 Thor films had that definitely was fixed by Thor Ragnarok, but still, as you're watching this movie, there's nothing inherently bad about it, but there's also nothing that stands out as spectacular or fun or enjoyable. It's just very lackluster, especially for this universe. Kicking off the top 30 is Iron Man 2. Now, it's obvious that Jon Favreau wanted a lot more time to make this movie, and that is apparent because as you watch it, there are so many different plot points and things that it tries to cram into one movie, and if you explore each of those avenues individually, they're all extremely interesting and fun, and I like them, but the thing is, you don't get enough time with all of them, and so when you're trying to mesh all of those together in such a short run time, it's hard to really feel the full impact of the moment and of the entire narrative they're trying to craft here. I think Justin Hammer is a character that I want to see more of in the MCU. I think he's absolutely outstanding, and I think Whiplash is actually a very good villain. The scene where Tony Stark has to suit up on the racetrack after his car gets flipped is one of the best suit up scenes in the entire universe. There's a lot working here, but just not enough time and leeway to expand the way I think Jon Favreau would have liked to. Coming in at number 29 is going to be Captain Marvel. This might be the most awkward film in the universe because there's nothing that I hate about it, but there's not anything else that I particularly enjoy either. I think Brie Larson wasn't necessarily on the same page as the filmmaker, so everything she does seems just sort of offbeat, and she is supposed to have that fish out of water attitude towards the beginning, but you never feel like she truly finds herself, and she never finds that personality of the character, so everyone she comes in contact with, she's almost like a brick wall. It's hard to show any emotions. You don't see any of that. She doesn't really give into any emotion whatsoever, so she's just sort of bland to watch on the screen. There's some cool action here. There's some cool twists and turns. I like the fact that a lot of it is set in the 90s and the banter between her and young Nick Fury, but then there's also a lot of cheap stuff like how we find out why Nick Fury's eye was scratched out. There's things about this movie that could have worked. It just doesn't have any flair or personality to it to make it anything special. Coming in at number 28 is Spider-Man Far From Home, my least favorite Spider-Man movie. Now, in terms of the universe, it's not the worst, but in terms of a Spider-Man film, there are so many issues I have with this movie that every single time I go back and rewatch it, I like it even less. Spider-Man isn't given any individuality or growth as a character. There's so many conveniences here with the plot as to how Tony Stark would give Peter glasses that pretty much give him all the power in the palm of his hand, even though he's been gone for 5 years and he's still a teenager. At least he has that mindset still at this point in life. So he makes a ton of dumb decisions that make him seem like he's an even dumber character than he was in Homecoming and Infinity War. He really made a major backslide here. It overly uses CGI that is so noticeably bad that it just takes you out of any moment that is trying to be fun or action-packed. And it sacrifices every serious moment for undercutting it with terrible, cringe, high school age humor. I know John Watts has been trying to craft this John Hughes-esque sort of trilogy, but here it just completely missed the mark, and it really made it feel very cheap and inauthentic in almost every single way. However, it does probably have my favorite post-credit scene in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it definitely led to things in No Way Home that I'm much more positive on. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, watching this film, it is very heartbreaking for me because Guardians of the Galaxy is in my top half of the MCU. So, seeing this film, again, it has the same problem as Spider-Man Far From Home, as it sacrifices much of the seriousness and the legit circumstances of the film for undercutting it with immature humor that really just takes you out of every single moment. It has a lot of interesting ideas, with Peter Quill finally meeting his father, Ego, who is, on one hand, it's his father who he loves, who he's missed, and he wants to have a good relationship with, but on the other hand, he has to come to terms with the fact that his father is a terrible, terrible person. That's an interesting dynamic to delve into, and I think they do that somewhat good, but again, it's sacrificed for so much humor that you never feel the full depth that is possible with that situation. You also have things like the death of Yondu, which is probably my favorite part of the movie. That did feel very sincere and sad in the moment. You hate that because he was really that main core father figure in Peter Quill's life. But every other subplot is uninteresting, and they do things like introduce Mantis, which is one of my least favorite characters in the MCU, and also expand on Drax in a negative way. Make him dumber than ever. He is really subjected to the worst bit of the comedy in this movie, and he's not able to show his abilities, and he really seems like he was a stripped back version of what we got in all of the previous films, and he makes you just not like him as much as you once did. James Gunn can be really good when he wants to, but he also has a tendency to be a little bit self-indulgent, and I think that's the case here. However, this might have a better soundtrack than the first movie. At number 26 is The Incredible Hulk. Now, I actually quite enjoy this movie. I don't think it's bad by any means. In fact, I think there are some ideas here that are very good, and it takes the film in a couple of directions that I wish the MCU would explore more often. But obviously, it is the black sheep of the family, as Edward Norton obviously is playing Hulk here, and he does not anymore. But when you look at it on its own, it's very harmless, and it does a lot of things that I quite enjoy. I think some of the action is good. It's darker, which I enjoy, and overall, it's just a story about Bruce Banner trying to search for the antidote to cure him of this angry green man inside of him known as the Hulk. I also think Tim Roth as Emil Blonsky, or Abomination, is pretty good, and his sort of acceleration into madness throughout the course of the film is a pretty nice character arc to have. And the end battle between Abomination and Hulk, I quite enjoy. I will say I'm not a huge fan of Liv Tyler in this movie. I think she's the stereotypical just sort of damsel in distress in this movie, and she doesn't do much besides just cry. But that being said, I still enjoy this movie. Now, obviously, it's not too attached to the rest of the universe, and all the movies after this I like much more, but I think this one gets a little too much hate. Coming in at number 25 is What If, which is Marvel Studios' first introduction into the animated realm of what their universe can do, and each episode tells a different story, sort of what if this happened instead of what we already know to be the case. But it also took us in a lot of new directions that open up the world of possibilities as to what can happen in the future of the MCU, because it was announced that this show is canon. There's a lot of stuff that I did like the Marvel Zombies episode and the Sorcerer Supreme episode and stuff like that. But overall, I just feel like there were more episodes in here that I just didn't care enough about after the fact, that quickly left my memory, that I wasn't as invested as I hoped to be. And overall, it just feels like a little serial adventure show that I could just put behind me and not even think about anymore. It's not a show that when a new movie's coming out, as of right now, I feel like I have to go back and rewatch every episode to prepare for it. It's kind of gonna be one of those projects I set aside in my rewatch. It's harmless, but just not as enjoyable as I think it could have been. At number 24 is Thor. I think this movie has a lot of great ideas as well, and it has a lot to do with the whole fish out of water aspect again once Thor comes to Earth, and I like that. It's sort of comedic. It plays into the idea of he has no idea where he is, and this is an entirely new reality to him. I actually think the relationship between Thor and Jane Foster works a little bit better here than it did in Thor: The Dark World. And also, everything on Asgard is beautiful. It's mythological. It's got a lot of stuff about it that is very thought-provoking and interesting. Also, the dynamic there between Thor and Loki's jealousy building over time. It's all great, but the thing is, it doesn't always balance it as well as it possibly could, because it's definitely like two parts, two different movies as a whole. And so with looking at that, it doesn't balance as much as it could, but I still think it's a lot better than people give it credit for. Thor Ragnarok. Now, a lot of people might think this is crazy that it's this low on my list, because I know a lot of people have it in their top 10 MCU, their top 3. But for me, this is another prime example of the humor not always working for me, because it sort of overplays the dramatic values that the film sets up. There's a lot of interesting dynamics here and concepts that it introduces, and for the most part, it explores them very, very well. I love the whole Thor versus Hulk fight in the arena. I love Hela as a villain very, very much. She's one of the best villains in the MCU to date, in my opinion, but it's just overly funny, and there's a lot of stuff in the beginning of the movie that seems just very useless to me, and that is extremely forgettable. I don't think it finds its footing until about 45 minutes through, but it is one of the best visually pleasing movies in the MCU, and it also has a lot of great musical cues, and the personality is definitely there. Just sometimes I think it's a little bit overboard for my liking, but it's still a good movie. Coming in at number 22 is going to be The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now, when this show first premiered its 2 episodes, I thought this has all the makings of being my favorite show of the year, my favorite MCU project when it comes to Disney Plus release shows, because it was strong in developing just how everyone is feeling after the events of Endgame. Sam having to deal with the struggle of this identity of how does he fit in, as well as this confliction of, do I take on the mantle of Captain America or not? I'm a black man, so how does that look in this current day that we live in? Bucky is heavily dealing with his anxiety, with his PTSD of all the things that he's gone through as the Winter Soldier, and so there's all this confliction and all these story arcs and narratives within the characters that I think are very, very good and interesting to dive into. But later on, as the show kept going, I felt like it just sort of started to crumble. It started to fall apart, introducing way too many plot points, giving characters motivations that just don't seem very realistic to who we've known them to be in past projects. I also don't feel like it was a good choice to give the villains more sympathy than anything, and actually take away from the construction and the development of the main characters. Like, there was a point to where Bucky and Sam were an afterthought compared to all of the villains in this show. It also might have had one of the worst finales out of all the MCU shows that we got this year. It was extremely cheesy. All of the moments didn't feel earned, and it felt like it was a little bit too on the nose with how much just exposition it was giving and how much dialogue there was about explaining every single detail of going on. It wasn't as good as it possibly could have been, and I thought it was going to be great. It just didn't end up being as strong as it started out to be. At number 21 is the Avengers. Now, I understand that this was a very monumental thing that happened, seeing all of these characters on the screen together in battle at the same time. There's a lot of dynamics that work about this, especially in the first half, where you see all the characters together and they are not meshing whatsoever. They're arguing, they're getting on each other's nerves, they're pushing back on each other's ideas because they think they know what's best. That's natural for all of these born leaders to come into a group, and they all want to obviously lead the pack. I think Loki is a great villain, and every moment that he has with these characters is outstanding. I just don't feel like it's as exciting as a lot of the other projects on this list, and for me, being at an age, I guess, when it came out to where I wasn't as hyped as everybody else, I didn't see this movie in the theater. There's a lot about it that I think just relies on nostalgia for it to remain higher on my list, and I just don't have that for this movie. I think it's great, but I've seen better. Kicking off the top 20 is Ant-Man and the Wasp. Now, I think this might be the most lighthearted film in the entire MCU. It's also the most non-circumstantial. There's not a lot in here that really is going to impact the rest of the universe. It's just sort of a one-off serial MacGuffin adventure. Getting to see Evangeline Lilly in the Wasp costume, really fully embracing that side of her that you could tell was about to come out at the end of the first movie, is awesome. I love the way that her and Scott Lang work together. I think she actually takes the front seat in this. I think she takes the driver's seat and really controls the path of this movie, and I'm totally fine with that. I think all of them work together very nicely. I will say that the villain, Ghost, here is not very interesting at all. She's not very well fleshed out, and she's probably one of the more forgettable or less impactful villains in the MCU, but overall, I don't feel like it needed that to be entertaining. What's fun about this is that they're all chasing after the same relic, and so it's Scott and Evangeline Lilly trying to escape the mob, and that is enough for me. I had a lot of fun with it and all of its many antics. At number 19 is Doctor Strange. This is like the inception of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, containing some of, if not the best visuals we've seen in all of these movies. It's just absolutely breathtaking. I also think it has one of the best origins when you see Stephen Strange leading up to the point to where he actually becomes the hero that we all know and love now, sort of how his ego overtakes everything and how he's so set on saving people, but he only wants to save the people that he knows he has the best chance of doing so. I think a lot of that is very, very interesting, and just seeing the battle and the struggle of him actually becoming the hero, having to put all of that aside to embrace what he's fully capable of, is extremely interesting. The thing that holds us back from being so much higher is I just don't think that Caecilius and I don't think that Dormammu are the most captivating villains, and I think a lot of them are just sort of there to be there. I think both of them are just sort of there without personality or motive to back them up. And that's what is a problem with a lot of these movies, but here I think it suffers from it quite a bit. Other than that, everything works for me. At number 18 is Avengers Age of Ultron. I think the reason that I have this higher than Avengers on my list is because it does everything that that film did, but just on a bigger scale. It's got more going on, and that can lead to it being messy in some instances, but I can't deny I always have a blast with this film. And even the sequence alone to where they're all trying to pick up Mjolnir, and you see that Captain America could do it if he wants to, but he just doesn't, and that's even more of an ultimate payoff when we come to Endgame and he actually fights with Mjolnir in battle at the end. There's a lot of things here that set things up for the future of the universe, but also just on its own, it's very entertaining. I don't like the Natasha and Bruce Banner romance that is set up out of nowhere here. If it's a romance, you could call it a sibling relationship, whatever you want to call it. It's just sort of weird and off-putting and doesn't necessarily make sense in the context of the story. I don't like how Quicksilver is quickly introduced and killed off in this movie. We could have seen so much more from him that would have been so rewarding and fun, I'm sure of it. I'll also say that I absolutely love Ultron in this movie, and I think James Spader voices him perfectly. He's very menacing and maniacal, and there's a lot of stuff that works for him. The only issue I have is that I want to see more from this character. We got a little bit more of him in What If, but there is so much more fleshing out that could have been done. I'm sad that he was killed off in this movie, that it was so quick to end, because there's a lot of interesting things that were set up that I wish were explored just a little bit more. It's not a perfect movie, but I can't deny I have a ton of fun with it. At number 17 is Loki. Man, I love this show. I think it's absolutely outstanding, and it's very thought-provoking in a lot of ways. It goes beyond just the typical Marvel Cinematic Universe formula. It really pushes the boundaries with what it does, and it introduces a lot of concepts that were very, very interesting, especially with the entire variant concept. And when it comes to that finale, getting to see the reveal of Kang the Conqueror, knowing that he is one of the least threatening variants out there and that there's somebody much more powerful, it introduced so many things that are going to play a major part in phase 4 of this universe, and I can't wait to see where it goes. The only issue I have with this show is that there were a few times where I felt like it was a bit boring or a bit uneventful, that it was more relying on the dialogue than actually giving us anything entertaining, which I have no issue with dialogue, but the dialogue wasn't always as interesting as I felt it could be either. It needed a little bit more fleshing out, maybe a little bit more fat cut off at the same time, and it could have been probably the best of all of the shows. Coming in at number 16 is Black Widow. The terrible villains aside, like absolutely garbage villains, maybe some of the worst, definitely some of the worst, this is a very fun movie. A movie that you could argue is 5 years too late, but nonetheless, we got it now, and so we get to have an extra solo adventure with Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff, as well as getting introduced to some amazing characters like the Red Guardian and like Yelena, played by Florence Pugh, who has already made her mark in this universe. It's got a lot of good hand-to-hand combat. I love the family aspect of this film and how they were torn apart, but seeing them come back together and rebuild that chemistry. This definitely has an overall theme of family and what they can do together, stronger together than apart. I love that side of things, but it also could have been much better. And it's a movie that it wasn't as well made as it possibly could have. You could definitely see the hindrance of the pandemic on this movie and really stripping it back from its full potential. But what we got is still a fun adventure that will be a nice, enjoyable rewatch every few years. Kicking off the top 15 is WandaVision, the first MCU show that we ever got, and it was one that was such a fun week-to-week experience. Every single day that it premiered a new episode, as soon as it was over, people were going on Twitter, giving their theories, giving their reactions, talking about how much it was exciting and nothing we'd ever seen before. And there were so many ideas presented that really opened up the possibilities of the universe, and it also showed the true potential of what Wanda could actually be, whether as a hero or a villain. It's still not 100% sure what direction she is going to go in, but it's also probably the most ambitious project we have gotten in the entire universe, seeing the first 2 episodes as these 60 sitcom episodes. Then you get on to the later 90 sitcoms, and just sort of every episode after that had its own theme and its own style, and the editing, the theme song, all of that, the way the characters acted, the clothes that they wore. It was a full experience, and I had a ton of fun with it. Now, it's not perfect. There were some reveals that were given to us that weren't as satisfactory as we had hoped. For example, Ralph Boner. There was also things like the finale episode that were a little bit more CGI heavy and less reliant on a good narrative, but still, when you look at the overall package, nothing is going to beat the experience of week by week waiting for this show to premiere a new episode, and all of the twists and turns that it gave us. It's one of the best anticipatory projects that the MCU has given us yet. At number 14 is Black Panther. I think this film is culturally relevant. I think it's very thought-provoking and mature within its themes. Chadwick Boseman, rest in peace, portrayed the character of T'Challa effortlessly. He is the only person I could ever see playing this role now. But you also have Michael B. Jordan playing Killmonger, who is one of the most captivating villains, who is really fighting for something that is not just a bad guy motive, but he's fighting for something that he personally thinks is very, very right. And when he gives some of his reasoning for it, he's not inherently wrong in all of his thought processes. It's just the way that he goes about it that makes him a bad guy in the context of this film. The way that Wakanda is brought up and introduced and just expanded upon is beautiful, and so much of the scenery is breathtaking here. It's got so many themes of family and about staying true to who you are, but also doing the right thing. It stands out in so many different ways. It also just brought a superhero to live action that so many kids can look up to and want to be and to aspire to be like, and I appreciate that. While I admire this film and I respect it, there's no way that its impact is going to affect me as much as it does other people, and I think that's great. This is a very culturally important movie, and I think that's why it's received so much of the recognition, and a lot of that is very deserved. Number 13 is the new kid on the block, Hawkeye. I think that this is the most narratively sound, the best overall show that we have yet gotten in the Marvel Disney Plus era of television. It's so consistent from episode 1 to episode 6. It felt like it went by so quickly, but that's just because I was consistently enjoying it every single week. The buzz wasn't as loud as other shows, but I think the fans of this are more committed to it and want to see more from this. I was not a fan of Hawkeye prior to this show, but by the end of it, it really made me have a soft spot for Clint Barton, Hawkeye, his journey that he's gone through. I think it does a great job at both exploring his trauma and his new outlook on life, but also introducing the new character of Kate Bishop, showing her personality, what she's capable of, and how she meshes in this universe already. It also introduced Yelena and brought Kingpin back into the MCU. There were less big reveals here than other shows in the lineup this year, but they were a little bit more solid and actually added more to the narrative and overall were more effective. So I really appreciate what this show was able to pull off, and I can't wait for the next season. Coming in at number 12 is Captain America Civil War. This is pretty much an Avengers movie, as you see all of them in this film, but what this does politically is very intriguing. I think putting Captain America and Iron Man at odds, picking a side, having everyone sort of choose who they bargain with more, who they are on the side of more, was a very interesting tactic, and definitely when it comes to the marketing, it drew a lot of people in, but it's got a lot to say here, and I think that it does so very, very well. Also, the airport battle sequence, seeing everyone go at each other, is like a dream come true. That's a comic book fan's biggest dream that just didn't seem like a reality at the time, and then they made it happen. The Russo brothers proved how capable they were at making high quality films within this universe. They also brought back Spider-Man and introduced him into the MCU. This was a very monumental film, and while it's not my favorite, it did a lot of things that just make me jump for joy. I can't help but be excited every time I watch it. Coming in at number 11 is Captain America, the First Avenger. I have such a soft spot for this movie. Seeing it young when it first came out, I just love seeing the origin story of Steve Rogers going from this small little puny nobody to turning into Captain America himself and really just finding this sense of bravery and boldness and wanting to go out and do what's right. And you see that montage of them actually fighting in the war, and he becomes the figure that we know of him today. There's a lot of great concepts there, as well as him meeting Peggy Carter and their romance blooming, and then the great ending of the film, as well as Red Skull. I think he's a great villain. Some of the editing is questionable, and like I mentioned, the montage sequence, I think some of that would have been better if it was drawn out a little bit more, given a little bit more characterization to some moments. But overall, I have such a blast with this movie every single time. But kicking off the top 10 is another newcomer to the MCU, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, a film that I had a blast with, and I think is one of the best origins in the entire MCU. The way we see this guy and his best friend struggling in the city, to her finding out what he's actually capable of, the father-son dynamic between him and Tony Luang, who actually plays the villain here, who plays the real Mandarin. I think he is one of the best villains in the entire MCU, as he's got a true motive. And again, he's only doing what he thinks is morally right, and he's fighting for his family to be one again. Shang-Chi, over the course of this film, has to learn to embrace who he is and his identity and his destiny, and become that hero who is able to stop his father and help people who are in danger. It also has probably the best hand-to-hand combat in the entire MCU. I mean, the entire sequence of him fighting Razor Fist on the bus, that whole sequence when they're going down the hill in San Francisco, was so fun. It's just very, very fun to watch. I also think the humor here is immaculate, and it's going to be hard to top, because this might be the funniest movie in the MCU. I don't know. There's a couple contenders. It's unique, it has heart, great action, and overall a levity to it that was a great addition to the universe. Coming in at number 9 is Spider-Man Homecoming, a film that fans were so excited because it was finally the first solo film of Spider-Man in the MCU, and it did not disappoint. It's fun, lighthearted, but also has one of the best villains in the MCU with Michael Keaton's Vulture, someone who is human. He doesn't have superpowers, and really everything that he's doing is again motivated by something that on the surface doesn't seem too inherently wrong. He's just trying to make the best life possible for his wife and daughter. daughter, he's just not going about it in the best way possible. One of my favorite scenes in the MCU is the interrogation scene in the car between Michael Keaton's Vulture and Peter Parker. I think he goes through a lot of different avenues in this movie of trying to find his own, trying to become bigger than he usually is, not wanting to just be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, but actually wanting to become an Avenger and join that. And throughout the course of this film, with Tony Stark by his side, showing him a lot of guidance, he becomes that sort of father figure role that Peter needs. And while I don't always appreciate it, it's probably the best here that it was in between this film and Spider-Man Far From Home. I feel like it does it okay here. It's not too much, even though I feel like there were moments to where Peter needed to learn how to grow on his own, and Tony Stark just sort of picked him up and got him out of trouble. But then there are also moments that are redemptive of that, to where Peter is laying in the pile of rubble and he has to figure out how to come out of it, and he has to use his own strength. He has to remember that he is the one who contains the power, and he's got to believe himself. There's a lot of powerful stuff here. There's a lot of lighthearted, fun elements to it. It's not very consequential to the rest of the universe, but it's a fun time, and it's definitely one of the better Spider-Man films. At number 8, I have Iron Man 3, directed by Shane Black. A lot of people hate this movie, and I'm really not sure why. I'm obsessed with it. I have so much fun with it. It's a Christmas movie, and overall, I think it's a ton of fun. What I love so much about this movie, though, is that for the first time, it's really dealing with the exploration of someone who is going through the trauma and the anxiety and the stress of the events that just happened. Tony Stark is still a human. He wears a suit that gives him these powers, but all these events that have happened in the past have really messed him up mentally, and this is the first example of showing a character go through that growth and go through those trials of trying to find who they are, trying to find that sense of peace after really being just so messed up because of things that have happened. It really embraces that darkness and that side of really having to look at yourself from the inside, that it goes through that inner turmoil and does all of this stuff in such a very unique and personal way that I wish they did more of this type of stuff in the MCU. This is one of the last films in the universe to have such a significant style to it that you just don't see. It's not as struck by the formula. It definitely has a mind of its own, and it plays out that way. Now, I don't think that Killian is the best villain, and I think that the Mandarin twist is definitely a tease, but overall, there's enough rewarding factors here to make me really enjoy this movie. Coming in at number 7 is Ant-Man, a film that I absolutely love, and I think people need to accept the fact that, yeah, this is a good movie. Yes, it doesn't have as much to do with the multiverse and the Avengers and all this stuff, but it's a great introduction to Scott Lang and Ant-Man as a character in the MCU, and it does a lot of fun things. It is just an adventurous, exciting film for the entire family. It's also extremely hilarious, somewhat self-aware, and it plays with different characters in ways that I've not seen ever before in a superhero movie. Everything with Luis, I swear he's a hilarious character who deserves his own Disney Plus show. Like, have him explain all of the events in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I will be one happy fan. But seeing Scott Lang, who is this delinquent who is getting into trouble all the time, turn into this guy who is sort of because of circumstances turned into a hero, but he's not really a hero. He's sort of like an anti-hero who's been set up by Hank Pym to complete a mission, and I like that. It's just a fun dynamic there. I think Michael Douglas is great here. Evangeline Lilly is great. You've got to talk about Paul Rudd and how charismatic he is in this role, and he just fits it so perfectly. It's got an end battle that is also very, very fun, and obviously when they're all small and they're fighting and stuff that looks big, like the Thomas the Train, and then they blow the Thomas the Train up. There's like a lot of stuff going on here that is very chaotic but fun. It doesn't have the most dynamic or compelling villain ever, but overall, it knows exactly what it is, and it was just a fun little escape adventure that doesn't have a ton riding on it like the rest of the universe. At number 6 is Guardians of the Galaxy, a film that nobody knew what these characters were, nobody was excited for it, but then everyone was blown away just by the amount of heart, the amount of fun and comedic edge the film had, the amount of great characterization, the way that they were able to bring in all these new characters and really make them mesh and make you feel for them so early on was incredibly impressive. Everything about this movie shouldn't work, but it does, and that's a major testament to James Gunn when he's really on it and when he knows what he's doing and he's in the zone, and he crafted a film that is not overboard, but every bit of it makes you want more and more and more. I can't get enough of this movie, and that's why it's so high. And it's been higher on my list at times, but that's just a testament to how the MCU continues to break barriers and deliver us films that are so well made that at times it's really hard to pick and choose what film to place where. Kicking off the top 5 is Avengers Endgame. Obviously, it's the culmination of, at the time, 23 Marvel Cinematic Universe films into one big epic adventure over 3 hours long. It was one of the best theater experiences I've ever had. It was ultimate fan service, but also had a narrative that really helped pay off the entire arc of the universe up to that point. The heart, the humor, it has no shortage of the epic battles. The middle of this film is a major MacGuffin story where they also time travel, and it has ultimate payoff like Captain America wielding Mjolnir in battle, bringing all back the people who were dusted. I Am Iron Man, where you see Tony Stark sacrifice himself for the lives of so many people. It's got everything that is just a crowd-pleasing experience, but it does it so well. Like, there's no reasonable explanation in my head prior that I could actually see this working out without being a jumbled mess that was convoluted, incoherent, but somehow, because of Kevin Feige, because of all the people involved in this project that are fans themselves of the universe they had crafted, they pulled off something that was so unique and so special, and it's going to be something that fans are going to be able to cherish for years, for decades, for generations to come. And it really says something that something so special is only number 5 on my list. Coming in at number 4 is Iron Man, the one that started it all, the introduction to Tony Stark, but also the Marvel Cinematic Universe in general. And I think what works so well about this film is it doesn't have the weight of the universe on its shoulders. While there was plans for the expansion, there wasn't that expansion yet. This was the first seed planted that grew into everything that would come after it, and because of that, there was more room for growth, for experimentation, just for personality to be injected in the film. But it also shows that personality of Tony Stark early on, the billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, all of his quirks and all of his traits that he has, and how conceited he can be, but then towards the end of the film, how he learns that there's more, and there's a possibility for actually helping others and becoming something that is bigger than yourself. And the iconic scene where he stands in the podium in front of all those people and he says, "I am Iron Man," for the first time was extremely powerful. There are also just so many individual scenes and moments throughout this film that are so special on their own, from him building his suit in the cave, you seeing him fly around in his little factory as he's testing the new suit he's building and working with the technology, and he's not necessarily gotten it down yet. The end battle between him and Ironmonger. I will say that Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stane was better when he was Tony Stark's friend, other than his foe, who turns into this guy trying to be like him. He's very jealous, and I think that it's natural that his arc is that he's motivated by jealousy, but the way that it actually plays out is not as fleshed out as it could have been, and not as interesting and dynamic as it should have been. And so while that end battle is fun, it's also pretty underwhelming, and definitely when you look at it, comparing it to the other end battles that we've seen in this universe, it's definitely a big difference there. But this was the first film of many, so it's understandable. They're still trying to find their footing. Jon Favreau crafted a pretty amazing film here, though. Kicking off the top 3 is Captain America and the Winter Soldier, a film that proved that the Marvel Cinematic Universe can literally do anything great. They can do anything that is entertaining and makes you excited to be a Marvel fan, because here they created a political espionage thriller and somehow it absolutely works on every single level. I think this does a great job at not only expanding the growth of Steve Rogers as Captain America, but also introducing the fact that there are going to be some snakes in the good side that are waiting to rat out the good guys and that are waiting to take over. And so this is definitely a coming to terms with the fact that you can't trust everyone, that even on the good side there are people in there who are looking to destroy you and take you down. And that's a lot for Steve Rogers to come to terms with, because he's an inherently good person who sees the best in all people he comes in contact with. Sebastian Stan as Bucky Barnes, aka the Winter Soldier, absolutely kills it, and that reveal when Steve actually finds out that his best friend is the one who's going around and causing all of this damage was absolutely electric the first time I saw it in the theater, and it was a very exciting moment but also heartbreaking. You could tell that he really felt in that moment like, wow, there's nobody I can trust. And there's also so much just great hand-to-hand combat here. There's great just confliction here on all ends. There's a lot that works here. This is a very, very fun, compelling, captivating movie that I enjoy every single time I rewatch it. And again, it just reminds me that Captain America has some of the most solid movies in the entire universe. Coming in at number 2 on this list is going to be Spider-Man No Way Home. Yes, it's that high. Well, it's not perfect. It's not the best comic book movie ever made. It is perfectly imperfect, and I embrace all of its flaws because ultimately it gets what it needs to get right. Very, very right. It's some of the strongest characterization of Spider-Man, in this case, Spider-Man, with the introduction of Tobey and Andrew from the multiverse as different villains, and now we know heroes come over when Doctor Strange casts that spell. It definitely gives a lot of growth to Peter, this version of Peter, and is the best Tom Holland performance we have ever seen as Peter Parker. It rights all of the wrongs of Far From Home and the issues I've had with him in this universe, and it delivers on so much fan service, but also never forgets to give us that compelling narrative that is sound, that makes sense, and that it delivers on every single element. There's so much to make me just want to scream and shout every time I watch it. And it's the little kid version of me's dream, and now it's a reality, and I'm just so excited that I can now watch this movie anytime I want, over and over and over again, because believe me, I'm gonna be watching it over and over and over again. There are very few words to describe how happy it makes me feel that this movie exists. And that reaction is definitely what they wanted to happen. And so many people have reacted that way. I'm so glad that people love this movie as much as I do, because it is truly something special. But my number 1 is going to be Avengers Infinity War. Now, you might ask why I'd have Infinity War over Endgame, and that's just because while Endgame was great, everything that happened in Endgame is because of what happened in Infinity War. This is the enabler for all of that in that film to happen. And I think what it did, especially at the end, was shocking us all and dusting all of our favorite heroes away, making it for once to see that the heroes lost was so powerful, but it was so sad in the moment. It was definitely one of the craziest theater experiences I've ever had, but also just finally bringing together all of these heroes that some of them had not yet met before, bringing Spider-Man into the Avengers finally and seeing him battle, taking him to space, taking everyone to space. Everything that happened on Earth and in space was great, but also introducing Thanos finally front and center into the universe, giving us his personality and showing us his motives that once again are not inherently the worst out there. Like, he actually has true motives that in his mind he seems to think that they are right, and it's very, very compelling. The action's good, the comedy's good, the chemistry between everyone is great, but like I said, nothing is going to beat the ending for me, and all of that is just the catalyst to what happened in Avengers Endgame. You have to credit this movie. And it's going to be hard for anything to top this, because this movie was an experience unlike any other, and that's why it has to be my number 1. So guys, there you have it. That is my ranking of all 32 MCU projects from my least favorite to my favorite. Like I said, my list is going to be very controversial. I know it is, but I want to hear what your list is. So make sure to comment down below and give me your entire ranking if you would like, from your least favorite to your favorite, because I definitely want to see what you guys think. But thank you so much for watching this video. 2021 has been a great year for superhero films, but especially the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I can't wait to see where it goes in the future, as they always continue to surprise us and bring new things into the picture that are just massive game changers. So I can't wait to see what's next on the table. But guys, thank you so much for watching. As always, make sure to subscribe and turn on that bell notification to get notified every time I post another video. But until next time, I'll see y'all later. Peace out.